And a very good morning and welcome to TJN Live. We are webcasting live from the Shepherd's House here in Bend, Oregon. And with me today is Cash Lowe.
Yes.
And you're with the Shepherd's House. What's your position here?
I'm the Director of Operations, and thank you for coming and spending the morning with us and giving us this opportunity to share with people what we're doing here.
Well, great, and thank you for all you do, and we'll find out just what that is here in just a minute. We want to give you an update on what are we going to be doing on the show this morning. We are doing a live webcast from the Shepherd's House on Division Street here in Bend with Cash Lowe. And, interesting name.
Yeah, I get a lot of interesting responses to that, especially in banks over the years.
There you go. Now, the second half of the show, Operation Eagle's Wings, going to have a little bit different program segment today. Congressman Greg Walden was in Sun River yesterday, and he was speaking about forest health, the need for jobs, and just an overview of what's going on in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. and Congress. Thought it would be interesting for veterans and everyone. We need to be out of here at the Shepherd's House by 8. So the first half hour, we're going to be talking to Cash about the Shepherd's House from 7 to 7:30. From 7:30 to 8, we'll have the comments from Greg Walden that he gave yesterday during the annual conference of the Oregon Forest Industries Council in Sun River at the Great Hall. We were there and had a chance to record it, and we'll be having those comments for you in the last half hour of the show today. Today's show will be about an hour long. So, Cash, the Shepherd's House, exactly what is it? People may have seen stories about it in the newspaper, but exactly what goes on here?
Yeah, the Shepherd's House has been around now for about 6 years, and the real focus of our ministry and what goes on here is outreach and ministry services to the hurting and broken of Central Oregon. So we do a couple of different things mainly here. One is we have a long-term care program for men who come to us with life-controlling issues such as addictions, many men who have been out of work for a number of years, and we work with them. We provide shelter for them. We also try and provide a holistic habilitation program, giving them a chance to receive some counseling, dealing with their issues, whether they're addiction issues, sexual addiction, drug and alcohol addiction, and working with them to integrate back into society long term. Also, we provide emergency shelter, and as the winter months approach, we're seeing more of a need for that. We provide, on the average, during the summer, about 3,000 beds per month or nights of shelter.
For an emergency basis?
No, though some of that's emergency. Okay. Much of that is long-term care. Okay. During the winter months, which we're going into as the weather started to dip down and get colder at night, that goes up to between 4,000 and 5,000 shelter beds per month.
What do you expect to see this year, this winter? A lot of, the economy hasn't been the greatest.
You're right.
A lot of people are out there. A lot of people right now are homeless who had never dreamed that they'd be homeless, but they are. What we're hearing from a lot of people is the need for shelter this winter could be quite significant.
I think it's going to be greater this year than it has in the past, Dave. And the reason I say that is because here in Central Oregon, there are a lot of homeless who live on BLM land out in the national forest in camps or singly. In years past, during this time of the year when the weather starts getting cooler, those camps start to thin out, and we see people going in and couch surfing with friends or moving in with relatives, and so the camps start to thin out. One of the things that we've seen this year is that is not happening. In fact, there's a slight increase in the number of people in the camps over even the summer months. So it's going to be a harder winter, many more people in need of help, shelter, and food.
So the numbers of camps and the number of people in the camps right now are increasing instead of decreasing?
Yes, usually you see a decrease, but they're actually increasing now.
Why do you think that is?
I think it must be a cumulative effect of the economy, how bad it's been over the years, over the last 5 or 6 years. People have burned out their resources and used up what they've had, whether it's relationally, economically, emotionally, and people are just worn out and have come to the end of themselves and do not have any more available resources.
What would you say to the critics of the camps and of the homeless who might say, well, if they can't get a job here in Central Oregon, why don't they just move somewhere else?
The people who we have seen, in fact, just this week I had a conversation with a man who moved on someplace else a couple of months ago. He's back now. What we're finding as they go to other places looking for jobs, looking for help, looking for emergency shelter, it's no better anywhere else. And so many of them are drawn back to Central Oregon because of their nexus of family relationships or friendships in the area. At least they have that here.
Okay, let's talk about the Shepherd's House once again. So you describe it as a holistic approach. You have Bible studies and you share about Jesus.
Yeah, you bet. Because I think, Dave, one of the differences that we have over a traditional drug and alcohol rehabilitation center or a program is we really truly believe that Jesus Christ is the answer to a lot of life's controlling problems. Healing in Jesus Christ is a key issue if life is going to change and get better for anybody. So we start off in the morning, 7:30 every morning. We have a chapel time. 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, we usually have a Bible study time or an addictions class, relapse prevention, the 12-step spiritual journey with Jesus Christ, forgiveness issues, anger issues. At 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, we have a time where we get together as the house, everybody in the house, and it functions like the body of Christ, where we confess our sins one to another, we pray for each other, we encourage one another, we come alongside of each other in walking towards what it means to figure out how to live life in this broken world as a follower of Jesus Christ. We also have some group time, the 10 o'clock hour, and then we have various classes, some life skills classes. We just implemented a new writing class this last Friday, so we're excited. We're still growing into it. We started the new program about 3 months ago. We're still growing into that.
Now, the new program, what is involved in the new program that wasn't here before?
Well, most of what I've just told you about, save the fact that there were always chapels here, and there were just a couple of classes available throughout the week. Now we have between 4 and 6 class hours dedicated to dealing with life-changing issues every day. Whereas before that was probably the total amount of class time a man would get in the entire week.
Now, for a man, and this is just a men's shelter.
Yes, it is.
For a man to stay here long term, he has to agree to take the classes and be part of the discipleship program?
Yeah, and we allow people to see our phase program. When a man comes in to apply and he is interested, we allow them to see our phase program, what it looks like, what all is entailed, and really the criteria for anybody to be here, including myself as a staff member, is a willingness to change and a teachable spirit, and a desire to grow in life and not just be content where I'm at, to grow and to get better, and especially to learn what it means to walk with Jesus Christ.
Amen. One of the things that is brought to mind right now is the recidivism rate or the repeat offender rate in Mexico. Briefly, I was working with the Freedom Team, and that's the strength team, the guys that break the bricks. And
they were here just recently, you bet.
Yeah, great story there.
Yeah.
Great ministry. And one of the reasons that the prisons in Mexico, and they found that the prisons in Mexico have been more open to them than the prisons in the United States, the figures in Mexico are the recidivism rate or repeat offender rate for people who have not accepted Jesus Christ is 80%.
Yes.
But for the inmates who have accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, it's 20%.
Yes.
So the figures are totally reversed, and you can see the success rate there. Let's talk about the success rate here. What kind of success rate do you have?
Well, I am new here. I've only been working here for 6 months, and I am not aware of any long-term tracking that they have done. I can say that in the past I have worked in recovery centers in the Bay Area, and our recidivism rate was much better than like the Betty Ford Clinic or the Schick Center, where their long-term recovery rate is usually in the single digits, between 3 and 7%. What we experienced and what we were able to track, Dave, was that long-term, we had a long-term success rate of non-relapse of close to 50% for all the men that we could track. So a whole lot different and much better. And you know as well as I do what that's due to. It's due to the fact that when we choose to give our lives entirely over to Jesus Christ, transformation happens.
Amen. So, how long have you been in the shelter industry? Or
Oh, wow. I was just thinking about that yesterday. I went off to Bible college in 1979 and met a man a fellow student who I played on the basketball team with, who worked downtown Seattle in a rescue mission. So in 1979, my first term in college, he actually got me down there volunteering, helping to mop floors, move chairs, share devotions. So I've been at it for, what would that be, 32 years.
Quite a while.
Yes, yeah, and it's been a great adventure. Much of my time has been spent overseas in mission work as well as here in the United States in the inner city recovery center ministry.
Now, when we look at inner city, so you've been in some of the bigger cities and obviously in Bend, which is much smaller. Are there a lot of similarities between the larger cities and the homeless need here in Central Oregon, for example?
I think there are more and more similarities as Bend grows and as Central Oregon grows. I will comment on the biggest difference. Even if you drive over the mountain and you're in Portland or you go up to Seattle, the biggest difference with homelessness between a rural and an urban area. Here in Central Oregon, most of the homelessness is hidden. You don't see it. It's not as readily present and in your face as you would find if you're on 3rd and Burnside in downtown Portland. You just do not see it. So it's much easier to ignore and miss if you're not really looking for it, if you don't know where to go. That's one of the biggest differences that we see.
Okay. How can people help?
Wow, thanks for asking. How can people help? Let me talk first about food. We provide during the winter months, we provide between 4,000 and 5,000 meals a month. And we do not have a kitchen. We have a few warmers and a microwave oven, but we're not licensed with a kitchen. So how can people help? We depend on volunteers to provide dinners every day of the week. And usually what they do is they'll buy the food and prepare a meal offsite and then come here and serve the meal to the men, to the women and the children that come in. We have a huge need. We're working with the state right now to get a licensed kitchen. That costs a lot of money, and we need some expertise and some people who can. So if anybody is willing or has a real vision for that, or God lays upon their heart to do that. Also, we have a huge need for food. Our budget is not such that we can just go out and buy the staples, meat and milk, fresh fruits and vegetables. We do have some vendors who provide some baked goods for us. We're really thankful for that. But we always have a huge need for food. You can imagine that many meals a month. We go through a lot of food. So food service and volunteers around that is a huge need. Another need that we have is for transportation. To get our men to churches on Sunday mornings, to midweek services, to celebrate recovery at Westside or some of the other churches in the area, we really are lacking transportation. We have one full-sized van that's pretty old and beat up. We have another minivan that the transmission is beginning to slip. So if anybody has vans just laying around that they're not using, we really need some transportation here. Another area that is kind of fun to talk about is Christmas is coming up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Christmas is coming up, and we have at least 32 men presently who live here full time. Many of them do not have family or friends in the area. Some of them come to us from out of state. It is always fun on Christmas to get a gift, a stocking full of, whether it's winter clothing, coats, hats, gloves, socks, special food items, a gift certificate to Starbucks or McDonald's, anything like that. And some of our men, too, have young, small children in the area. And not being employed and not having the money to go out and just buy gifts for their children, that's also a need that we have. Another huge need is we're majorly understaffed. We only have 2 full-time positions, and those positions are grossly underpaid. We have a couple of part-time positions as well. The only way that's going to change is if we are able to get financial contributors or contributions or grants that would allow us to go out and hire some more people full-time to provide quality care, counseling, ministry to the hurting and broken here. We are going to shoot up as soon as the temperature drops below 20 degrees. We are able to start throwing down mats in the chapel here, and we'll have up to 60 people a night in here. And to have just a couple people staff the place, we depend a lot upon volunteers. So that's another need that we have, are just people who are willing to partner with us in this ministry financially and help us to provide for the needs that are growing and increasing in Central Oregon. We have also outgrown this facility. We could easily move into a facility 3 times this size and within a week be using every square foot.
Do you own this building?
No, we don't. We lease this facility, but we are looking to expanding. We would love to, number one, open a women and children's facility. Huge need for that here in Central Oregon. Many of the women who are in the camps suffer a lot of abuse, and the children in the camps. We would love to open a full-time large facility for women and children. We would also like to open a larger facility for men long term, and then maybe keep this facility as a drop-in shelter emergency services facility. So we're looking to the future and are wanting to begin raising money and bringing in the resources that we need to expand as well.
By the way, we do want to mention that EVM Media, powered by WebFormex, the fact that we're here broadcasting live today is because of the internet services that we get from WebFormex. We're also powered by Bentel of Bend, Oregon, providing the high-speed internet for our main studio complex here in Bend. So thank you to those people that are extending services to us and making it possible for us to do what we do. Cash, let's talk about the misconceptions of homelessness. What if you could list just a few misconceptions? You know, as people drive down the street and they look at somebody homeless, maybe holding a sign up, they immediately have some misconceptions in their mind. Let's talk about those a little bit.
I think one of those is, oh, those people are just lazy. If they would just work harder, they could get off the streets, they could get a job and be able to take care of themselves. That is a huge misconception. Many of the people who come to us off of the streets and come into our long-term program, they're some of the most hard-working individuals you'll ever come across and you'll ever meet. For many people, it is not an issue of just laziness or pulling it together. Many of our folks come to us with life-controlling issues, Dave. I could tell story after story regarding individuals who are survivors, who are courageous, who are hardworking, who are brave people. But when you grow up in a home where you've been abused ritually, where you've been abused sexually, where you've been beaten physically for years, you learn some survival coping mechanisms or skills that keep you alive and help you to survive in the home, but don't necessarily serve you well out in the real world or in the workplace. To help people to get a handle on those life-controlling issues, to grow beyond those, and to develop some new skills and behaviors around learning how to negotiate life on real world's terms are what we are about. So that is one of the misconceptions. Another misconception is that they're dirty, they're untouchable, I don't want to get close to them. That's not necessarily always true. Yeah, if you're camping out, if you imagine if you've ever been on a week-long camping trip, sure, you might smell a little different, and in the winter trying to get showers and a little bit different, but that's not their choice. For most of them, don't want to live that way. Another misconception, let me talk about the other side of the coin, a reality.
Sure.
Many of the people that you see who are chronically homeless struggle with mental or behavioral challenges, mental issues. Our system here in the United States does not lend itself to meeting their needs and walking alongside of them, to providing the care that they need. Our system is broken in that regard, and so people who fall between the cracks. We just last week had a young man who was dropped off here from the hospital, had some mental issues, was not appropriate to stay with us because we are a community that we don't have a lot of room here. We have 30 beds in a really small space, and so you have to be able to live in close quarters with other people. This young man was not able to do that. He had some behavioral and mental issues where he would wake up screaming in the night and fighting, become pugnacious and want to battle anybody around him. So it was not appropriate for him to stay here. We just do not have the expertise, the professional staff to deal with that type of a situation. But there's nowhere else for him to go.
So where did he go, and what happens to somebody like that?
You know, unfortunately, I don't know where he went, Dave. What happens to a person like that? They oftentimes end up in the camps or living on the streets. They are easy prey to violent crime or petty crime. They end up becoming abused, and many times they develop violent behaviors in themselves to just try and protect themselves. I would love to have a center that was fully funded and fully staffed where we could provide safe, loving, Christ-like place for people like that where they could come and live. Unfortunately, that takes a lot of money, and our community just is not able or unwilling to put out that type of money to meet those needs right now.
One of the challenges that shelters have here in Bend, I know elsewhere, is we briefly touched on it with misconceptions, but neighbors around shelters can sometimes cause some challenges. As you look for a new facility, that's one of the criteria, isn't it, to make sure that that the neighbors understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I do not. I do not fault our neighbors in any way. One of the things that we do are we provide meals for the homeless. And we have people coming in all hours of the day and night needing help. There are some misconceptions about some of those people. And unfortunately, Dave, sometimes we do attract some folks who bring with them some behavioral issues that are not fun to deal with. Our goal at Shepherd's House are to be really good neighbors. In the past 6 months, anytime our neighbors on either side have come to us with concern, care, or problems, we want to partner with them and be about a solution. We will bend over backwards to try and be a good neighbor. Our men who live here try and work really hard policing the grounds, making sure it's clean. If a problem person shows up and starts causing problems for our neighbors, we try and intervene as soon as possible and work with them. We want to be a good neighbor. We are part of the community, and we want to be about building a better community.
So you plan on being here long term?
I don't see the problem going away, and so unfortunately, in a backhanded kind of way, we have some real job security. I don't see the economy getting better in any way. So a need for people to minister to and to partner with and to reach out to the homeless, the hurting, and the broken. Yeah, we don't plan on going away anytime soon.
What's your biggest challenge right now? Is it money?
Yeah, with the economy the way it is, Dave, you hit the nail right on the head. It is a constant struggle to bring in the money that we need to run a facility like this, to staff it, we have a problem from one week to the next just putting food on the table. And volunteers who can bring in either the food that we need or who have the generous spirit to write the checks from one month to the next, that's our biggest challenge right now, I think.
We've talked to some churches, and some churches nationwide have noticed giving has gone down about 60%, anywhere from 40 to 60% depending on the church. Are you finding a similar challenge here?
Yeah, if I look back over the last couple of years, especially last summer of 2010 through last spring, the giving was down quite significantly. Fortunately, we've experienced a bump in the last couple of months. It's gotten us back to the point where we're able to break even from one month to the next. But in terms of being able to provide the food and staffing that's necessary, we're still not where we need to be.
How much does it cost to run this on a monthly basis, the Shepherd's House?
Yeah, on a monthly basis, our rent is around $4,000 a month. We do not have the food budget that we need. We could use a couple $1,000s more a month rent-wise. Staffing is our biggest expense. To pay people a livable wage in today's day and time that's very expensive. And so staffing positions right now are full-time staff. We're only able to pay a couple $1,000s for full-time for people who are giving us 40, 50, 60 hours a week. That's unfortunate. So we still are not we're still not where we need to be financially in terms of staffing, and we still need to put on at least 2, if not 3 more full-time positions just to meet the needs that we have here.
Do you feel like we might have a perfect storm coming up in that the economy is probably at its lowest point? Nobody really knows when it's going to start recovering or get better. And we've got cold weather coming up, more people out on the streets, more people homeless, more people jobless. It's going to be a difficult winter, isn't it?
It's going to be an incredibly difficult winter. I am not an economist or a financial person, but what I'm seeing and what we're seeing here and in the camps, it is not looking good. And as a community, one of the things about Bend in Central Oregon that is a blessing is that most of the people who live here are very community-minded, and they respond when there is a need. And this is a situation in which we as a community really have the opportunity to pull together and do something special here to meet some needs for our brothers and sisters that are struggling, that are down on their luck, that are dealing with life-controlling issues. It's a great opportunity, and one of the great things about Central Oregon as Bend is when people hear about a need, they respond.
How can people help if they'd like to? How can they contact you?
They can contact us. They can either come by. We're here on Division Street. They can go to our website at Shepherd's House. There are contact information on our website. They can either contact us through email or call us directly. My cell phone number is area code 541-550-0025. People are welcome to call me. Our executive director, his name is Kurt Flosky. His cell phone number is 541-788-2510. We'll take your calls anytime. We need help, and we would love to talk to you.
Cash, it's been a pleasure to talk to you today. God bless you for all you do.
Thank you, Dave. It is a pleasure, and thank you for coming down and letting us share.
And we'd like to come back again, and especially this winter when we'll see how we can arrange it for showing, is because some of the people who are homeless, for whatever reason, opt not to have their image on TV or on the internet.
I can understand that, yes.
But we're also very concerned about what's going to be happening this winter. It's an issue that we want to keep an eye on.
You're welcome anytime. Just give us a call, Dave. You come on down.
Okay. Thank you very much, Cash.
Thanks. God bless.
Now, the next segment we're going to be having is a segment for, oh, by the way, we do want to mention a show we're having tomorrow with Chris Esquivel of Redmond. Now, Chris was shot and, my understanding, almost died, and he has an amazing story of how he believes God saved his life. So Chris Esquivel will be on the show tomorrow. We'll be broadcasting from Redmond, and looking forward to having you on for that show as well. Now, yesterday in Sun River, 2nd District Congressman Greg Walden was at the Great Hall speaking to the Oregon Forest Industries Council and speaking at their annual meeting about forest health, the need for jobs, and overall his take on what's going on in Washington, D.C. So let's go to that interview now with Greg Walden from yesterday. This was shot yesterday in Sun River.
Honor to once again welcome to our annual meeting our 2nd District Congressman Greg Walden. This will be the 9th consecutive time that Greg has been the keynote speaker at the OFIC annual meeting, and it's always a highlight of our meeting. Greg is now in his 7th term, is that correct, as a member of the U.S. Congress after a distinguished career in the Oregon legislature. 2nd District is all of Eastern Oregon, a lot of Southern Oregon. It's probably bigger than several states. And as such, it is definitely a rural part of the country, and Greg understands and cares about the issues that affect rural communities probably as more than anyone in the state or the nation. At the same time, his talents and skills have taken him now to the very highest level of leadership in the U.S. House of Representatives, which is a real feather in the cap for not only him but for the state of Oregon to be in the right rooms at the right time, which makes a big difference. In addition to that, he is the chairman of one of the most influential subcommittees in the U.S. House of Representatives, the Communications and Technology Subcommittee of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, which is a very critical, important committee to a lot of industries. Because of all this, the demands on his time have grown exponentially, and that makes it all the more gratifying that he's able to include our annual meeting on his schedule again this year. So with that, please welcome Congressman Greg Walden.
Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. With an introduction like that and the applause, I should just stop. Just waiting to see if anybody wanted to applaud at that. Thank you very much, Ray. It's been a delight to have worked with you for so many years and to be here for, I guess, my 9th year in a row. You really need to get an invitation list, you know, for speakers. I don't know what. But I am delighted to join you. Chairman Tom, thank you for your leadership of OFIC. You know, it is Columbus Day, and I want to just put this whole day in the context of the federal government. If you think about Christopher Columbus when he left Spain, he really didn't know where he was going. When he got to the Americas, he didn't know where he was. And when he went back, he couldn't tell the Queen and King where he'd been, and he did it all in somebody else's money. And there's a lot of that going on, I think, these days in Washington. I won't mention Solyndra. But let's move right along. Look, I'm delighted to join you today, and I wanted to do an update on some of the issues we're working on, both directly affecting forestry and jobs and some that don't. And then I'd like to throw it open to Q&A, because I know Wayne Giese stayed up all night to get a question ready for me. Let's talk about jobs. This is my 11th trip to Deschutes County so far this year. I'm on a 4-day, 3-county, 1,153-mile, 7-meeting schedule this weekend. I was out in La Grande for the demobilization of the 3rd of the 116th, our troops that got back from Iraq safe and sound. And it was a wonderful thing to welcome them back. And then after I leave here, I actually go on to Ontario tonight, where I'm a speaker there, and after a couple of meetings, then on to Boise and back to D.C. after that, starting my 434th round trip in 7 years. Here in Deschutes County, you got about 12.7% unemployment. 12.7. Crook County, 15.6. You know the statewide average, you know the national average. It's just not getting any better. And yet, I am convinced there are things we could do to put people back to work, not only in the state of Oregon and the Northwest, but around the country. If America would just allow us, the government would just allow us, to open up and use our resources, whether that's oil and gas or whether that's timber. And obviously today I'll focus a bit on what we're doing on timber. But I can tell you that my colleague from North Dakota, Rick Berg, and I were talking the other day. You know, they're now accessing their great resources there on energy, oil and gas. They got 3% unemployment or something like that, and a housing shortage. You know, if you use your resources and put them to good use, sometimes you can drive jobs and your economy in a positive way. We don't do enough of that. And in fact, we need to do a lot more. Now, there's work going on in Washington as we speak on legislation that would change the paradigm in how we manage our federal forest lands. Congressman DeFazio and I have been working on these issues somewhat separately, but not on different paths particularly, with the notion that what has happened to date does not work, that the paradigm that's been in place is broken and needs to be fixed and shifted. And so we're looking at both the O and C lands and, frankly, I'm probably more in this direction, the federal forest lands as well, to say there's got to be a better way to manage them. If we just managed them like we do the Oregon lands under the Oregon Forest Practices Act, we'd be leagues ahead of where we are federally. Federal government controls 60% of the forest land in Oregon and has 12% of the harvest. 73% of the harvest comes from you all that own the private lands. That's where the harvest is from, and then, of course, state and county. We've witnessed after these enormous fires that only the private and the state and the county and the tribal lands get in and get active restoration and harvest work right after the fires. The federal folks are still talking about it 2 years later, and then they're getting litigated. And so the trees become hazards that even OSHA won't let you get in and deal with. Just drive over from Salem through around Subtle Lake. Whatever happened? Whatever happened? Nothing. I went through there after that first fire, and there was a chunk of ground that the Forest Service proudly had thinned out prior to the fire. I know this will shock all of you because you don't get out in the woods much, but most of those trees survived when the fire went through. And in the ground that hadn't been treated, it's all up in smoke, and all that's left is snags. We have to have a better goal. So I've worked with Doc Hastings, who chairs the Resources Committee, and then Rob Bishop, who's the subcommittee chairman for forests. And they put forward a draft piece of legislation, we had a hearing on it 2 weeks ago, to change how federal forest lands are managed, to bring certainty to those areas that have been determined where harvest should occur, and allow the Forest Service the tools to get around all the litigation. Now, there will be different ways to kind of skin this cat, I'm sure, before we're done. But the long and the short of our goal is let's get certainty back in the process and let's get people back in the woods working. And that's how you develop the jobs and the revenue to pay for our schools and roads. That's what we need to do. Now, you heard probably the end of last week, the senators put together a plan for bridge funding for the county roads and schools. And indeed, they've got a concept that they think will fly in the Senate. We'll see how that works in the House, but we're all in the understanding that between now and when we will change federal land management, we will need some sort of bridge funding. But that is not the answer. I mean, I've been through every one of those fights along the way, and we have successfully authorized and reauthorized and authorized and reauthorized and waited for the economies of our counties and communities to change. Well, you know what? That change isn't going to occur in some of these communities that are very remote, and 70% or more of their land mass is federal owned. That is the economy. What we have to do is change the government. not try and change these communities. And so we're going to move forward on that. We had a hearing on the legislation, and we are moving forward in a lot of discussions, and I think there's a positive opportunity here. Given the fact that jobs are the #1 problem and issue in this country and state, given the fact that we spend half the Forest Service budget fighting fire, given the fact that all that pollution goes up in the air and water sheds are threatened, tell me we can't get this better. So we're moving forward on that. Now, there are a couple other issues I want to touch on, both of which directly impact jobs in our state. The first is a little outside of your industry, but it relates to cement. But it all ties together with what the Environmental Protection Agency is doing. They have this new rule called the Cement MAC, which is Maximum Achievable Control Technology. This is whatever's out there that's the maximum, that's what we should achieve, and most people don't argue with that except when they go overboard. And in the case of cement, they've gone overboard. They've taken the lowest polluting facility in the country and tried to provide that standard to every other one, not taking into account that the ore that they use in other places is different. The limestone has different qualities to it. And in our case, why it matters is out in Durkee, outside of Baker City. Ash Grove Cement has had that cement plant out there for, I don't know, you all have probably driven by. If you've ever gone to Ontario, you go right by the cement plant, right? It's been there 30, 40 years. I don't know. It seems like forever. The limestone there has a little more mercury than elsewhere. So Ash Grove put $20 million into activated carbon injection technology to reduce their emissions. Before any of these rules took effect, 3 years ahead of the rules taking effect, they went ahead and made the investment, $20 million. They are reducing at least 90%, and they tell me they're hitting 93 or 4 or 5% on average reductions. These rules would tell them they have to hit 98.4%, which is not achievable. So it's not maximum achievable control technology in this case. What it is the elimination of 109 direct jobs and 654 indirect jobs in the biggest taxpayer in Baker County. So the House last week passed what we call the Cement MAC legislation, which is designed to tell the EPA, go back and try again. Go back and try again, follow the real Clean Air Act, and come back with a plan that works, that is achievable, that is affordable, and give these businesses time to be able to integrate it in. It seems to me when you have an administration saying jobs, jobs, jobs in a country, it says please, 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 why does the other hand of the administration out there trying to kill jobs, jobs, jobs? And you see that with the Boiler MAC rule that's been coming. As you know, I was down at Boise Cascade's plywood mill in Medford the other day. $1.5 million to $3 million to redo each of the 3 boilers is the estimate. And then it probably doesn't even work. But we know it's going to cost jobs. And what happens in both of these cases is not only do we lose the manufacturing jobs in America, we shift them overseas. And in the case of mercury, which is the issue on the cement plant, in the EPA's own roadmap on mercury from 2006, they identified 83% of the mercury that comes into here comes from overseas. So what are we going to do? We're going to put the jobs overseas. They don't have near the controls we have. And then we're going to get both the cement and the air over here. Now that seems like a real lose-lose. And yet we see this over and over and over again. You're seeing this with the Ninth Circuit's decision on the Clean Water Act and what it would mean to logging and running equipment on roads. You know, in the House, we passed an amendment in the continuing resolution. It didn't stay in. The Senate forced it out to deal with that issue. We got individual legislation to deal with that issue and overturn the Ninth Circuit's ruling on this. But it's there for now and moving forward. And so we're going to continue to work on that. Oh, by the way, on the cement issue, our entire delegation just signed a letter to EPA endorsing Ash Grove for the EPA's Clean Air Excellence Award in the category of clean air technology. Isn't that amazing? They're up for this national EPA award, and a company that's getting punished by the rules will shut them down, basically, if they go for it. I'm sure none of you have ever faced this. Let me talk about a couple other things that are bigger and more global. And that is, where are we headed in terms of the debt and the budget, tax policy, and all of that. As you know, countries never faced this level of debt before. We also, in the House, have pushed back very hard. And I think that was part of the message coming out of the 2010 elections was a governor there. They wanted a check and balance there on one-party rule that for many voters felt like it was out of Congress and president out of control. With the things that were pushed through, I think maybe last time or 2 times ago, I brought the bills 2,000 pages high that nobody had a chance to read. And so we were pushing back. Now, when you push back and you debate these things and you have a give and take, there are those out there who want to say Washington's then gridlocked. Well, you know what? If gridlock means we don't have runaway deficit spending, we're actually turning this Titanic the other direction to try and keep it afloat and reduce deficits, then so be it. I'm ready for that fight. Because the alternative has been trillion-dollar additions to the country's deficit and debt year after year after year. And in a sour economy like we have, there's more going out than coming in, and there are always those in Washington who want to spend even more. So we cut spending in the first part of the year, and we've cut spending since. And if we continue on the path, we'll actually have back-to-back years where we'll spend less than the prior year, and I don't think that's ever happened in the federal government. But we got to do a lot more than just that. And so this committee of 12 was appointed. It's members of Congress, 6 House members, 6 senators, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, with a goal of finding $1.2 trillion over 10 years, and maybe as much as 1.5, but that's a floor, not a ceiling, to cut in federal spending. And that has to be done in order to increase the debt ceiling. I don't think that process has ever occurred in Washington before, where the debt ceiling was offset mandatorily by reductions in spending over a period of time. Now, yes, it's a 1-year increase in the debt ceiling and a 10-year payback, but it's almost like having a 10-year loan where you have a mechanism to pay off that loan. You get to raise the debt ceiling by 1.2. It means you go borrow it, and we're going to cut spending by 1.2, 1.5. Will it work? We'll find out. We'll find out. It's too early to tell. I know these members fairly well, at least on the House side, and I can tell you in what little discussions I've had, because they all have sworn themselves to a gag policy, they're encouraged. And they're approaching it, for the most part, in both a bipartisan way and with a firm understanding of the problem we face in America, which really should transcend politics. As we watch what's happening in Greece and Italy and Spain and the Euro and the Eurozone, you realize that contagion can quickly come here. Somebody asked the speaker the other day, what keeps him up at night? And John Boehner said, Europe. Because what's happening in Europe can easily come here and affect us. And when we teeter on the brink of a recession, it's pretty clear we better lead and get our house in order when it comes to our fiscal responsibility and management of our government. Because when you're borrowing 42 cents on the dollar, you're going to go broke eventually. And that has to change. So we've got a lot going on. That committee will conclude its work by November 23rd, and the House and Senate are scheduled to vote on its product by December 23rd. That's in law, or else automatic across-the-board cuts take place. So one way or another, things are going to change. I would hope that they use this as an opportunity with split government to do big things. You know, it is in split government where big things have occurred in the past. If you think about it, when Ronald Reagan was president and Tip O'Neill led the House, that's when they reformed Social Security the last time. It's when they did tax reform in '86. And when Bill Clinton was president, the Republicans controlled the Congress, it's when they did welfare reform. And so it occurs in those times because it's hard for one party to blame the other in the election cycle if both parties have been involved in the policy cycle. And so I'm hopeful that they use this opportunity to address some of the big problems we face, that we know we face, that the actuaries tell us we face, and actually do the big things that have to be done to get America back on its feet. And so we can change policy domestically, like I'm advocating on our forests. We can try and stop the regulatory onslaught that simply is out to kill jobs and drive manufacturing overseas. And we can address these big challenges we face fiscally and in our big programs. But all that's going to take a lot of work. And so with that, I thank you for letting me come and share those uplifting remarks with you about how great things are in America. I look forward to your questions. Thank you. Oh, Wayne, I knew I could count on you.
Greg, the argument now before the United States is brick against the book. And if some of our side don't start
Well, first of all, you can start with the truth, which is revenues of the federal government are running about where they have, within a range of a point or two. If you go back against the gross domestic product, they've been about 17.7% since the end of World War II. Our problem's on the spending side that's running about 23%. And if you look at the spending curve, it just goes up like that. And then if you want to talk about it, the top 10% of the wealthy in America already pay 73% of all federal income tax revenue. The top 10% already account for 73%. Now, those are just some of the data points that I think are important. The real issue here is I've never seen a president of either party that has so tried to set one group of Americans against the other to the growth of the federal government, because that's really what his plan appears to be, is raise taxes, spend more money. Raise taxes, spend more money. And I've never believed that raising the taxes on, the upper end somehow produces private sector jobs. And what we ought to be about in America, and I thought we were, is saying, I know my parents always told me this, if you work hard, study hard, go that extra step, do this, do that, work 2 jobs, you can get ahead too. And now it seems like we're told you do all that and then you owe somebody more. And I don't mean that in the sense of philanthropy and all the things you do in your communities, by the way, but somehow the government has a right to that. And that's not the prescription I want for America. I want one where we go back to this notion that if you worked harder, if you took a risk, maybe it all starts with these bailouts. You took a risk, you won, you lost. If you won, you got to keep it. If you lost, you lost. And I think anymore we just have too much government in the middle of that equation. And I just don't want to see us go down this path like other countries have. You talk to some of the former East European countries that found freedom in the 80s and 90s. And they kind of shake their heads and say, what are you guys doing? And when the Chinese are lecturing us, as they have, about commerce, something's gone terribly off the tracks. And when they can move faster than we can to not only use their own resources but to drive jobs, something's off the tracks here. And demonizing any group, I think, is wrong. I've never been a fan of that as a way to accomplish the goal. Now, we can have our disagreements and we can argue about things, but this seems to be a full frontal attack, and I just don't think it's right. I know it tests well in the polls, believe me. But I don't have the charts today, but I've got a whole set of charts I use at town halls that really lay out who's paying what share of tax and what that burden looks like and what it looks like over history. And, you could confiscate, I think the Wall Street Journal had this story, you could confiscate the wealth of the top 400 Americans and you'd pay off the debt for this year. Now I don't know what you do next year.
I agree with you 100% in everything you said, but you got to have some way from Washington, D.C. to explain that to the voters.
Yeah.
And you guys are good enough, I think, to do it. So I got my hats off to you and expect good results.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We don't always have quite the podium and microphone that the President of the United States has. Yeah. Yes, sir. Ralph?
Prospects of getting those renewed to actually do something with our federal force, including on sea lands,
Right.
that we've been failing to do for 30 years.
Yes. Yes, it is the time. And that's why we're putting full energy into this effort. I've been on it for several months in helping work on the legislation to get it ready. And we've already had one hearing on it, which doesn't sound like much in that many months, but in the grind of the legislative process, so it's actually pretty good. And I do. And plus, it's the right thing to do. I mean, we in this room have felt this way for a long time. I mean, I look at Hal and think about our discussions and some of the others on the bill Brian Baird and I had on the Forest Emergency Recovery and Research Act to, go in after the fires and clean up quicker like you do on your own lands, and you could restore the forest and you could get the material out while it still has value before it becomes a widowmaker for anybody that even walks in there. And there are things we could change that just are common sense. And management of our federal forests is common sense. And nobody's talking about going into the wilderness areas or these other things that have been set aside. I mean, but tell me you couldn't use the same formula we've used in Oregon in terms of setbacks and regeneration and all that on the federal ground and just get away from this endless litigation. There's a whole litigation industry that's popped up. And the chief of the Forest Service told me, I said, I've heard that you even have to sometimes pay attorney's fees to the litigants even when you prevail. And he said, yeah, we do. So if you can never lose and you only get funds to go forward, are you really there to help find better management, or does it become just an industry of its own? And I think it's become an industry of its own that defies common sense. I had my famous backpack trip around Mount Hood with Earl. We were going, we had our own tents. We were going, just want to clarify, we were coming through above the Bull Run watershed, and I remember asking the forester who was with us on that leg of the trip, so tell me about this forest. He said, well, it's a stand replacement fire on about a 100-year rotation. And I said, so how long has it been? About 100 years. So when the Dollar Fire jumped up and took off and headed to the Bull Run, I thought, well, there you go. And it's only a matter of time. It's the ecosystem up there. And especially when they go on vacation once the fire's identified. Don't understand that one, even though it was in the wilderness. But the long and the short of it is, we know what the fire regimes are out there. We know what the forest health and lack of health is. And I'll tell you, if you're a private landowner, here's something else. A private landowner next to the federal forest, you got to be pretty darn nervous and have a pretty big buffer, right? And then, you all are aware of this, the litigation now that's starting up, that if the fire starts on your property and burns onto the Fed's going to come back and sue you for the loss on the federal ground, even if it was in an area that was never to be harvested. And they're now training the lawyers in the Justice Department to pursue this litigation. Do you understand the consequences of that? Of course you do. But I don't think the average American does. This will bankrupt every private forest landowner that ever has a fire. Because they're talking about viewshed values and everything else on federal ground that was never going to be managed. And so I'll tell you, we got some big challenges. Jennifer?
I wanted to talk about the Healing pilots. A group of us were watching DC last spring, and you asked what we thought. And I told you I was hopeful that it
Right.
exposed the issues that have stopped at our program all the time. And the one fear was that we'd avoid all those issues and end up with a timber sale that we all thought you said was a great result. And that's exactly what happened in my view, is we avoided all the issues that we need to address and kind of double them down. And now I see here talk about, let's replicate these and scale them up. And I just wonder where you think that's headed and how that lines up with the LNC Act.
Well, and that's all in the discussion. So without prejudicing it all, because it's not all worked out by any stretch of the imagination, I was concerned that's where it would head and end up. And as some of you know, maybe with me one night here in Bend, I wondered, don't we know what the problems are already? I mean, haven't we lived this for 30 years now? I think we know what the problem is. And the elephant in the room is the underlying federal law that sets up a process that almost ensures no timely outcome and no active management. I mean, that's really what it gets down to. And so it just seems to me like we know what the problem is. I was willing to give it a chance to, could they find a way through it? And I think the final analysis is, the answer is no. I mean, we're fighting this on this little Bowman Dam bill I have. So Bowman Dam, out here in Prineville, Facebook located one of their data centers. They need water to be able to cool, and there are 3 other data centers looking at locating there, all of which have code names. I don't even know who's behind them in most cases, but they need water. The city needs water. There's 80,000 unallocated acre-feet of water behind Bowman Dam. When they did the wild and scenic designation in the 80s, they drew the line for the start of the wild and scenic of the Crooked River right across the center of the dam on the yellow lines. Now, there's nothing scenic about a dam unless you're falling over one side of it and then looking, I don't know. If we move that a quarter of a mile downriver, multiple things begin to happen, all of which are good. A company, most likely PGE, would then put hydro on the dam. 50 construction jobs each year for 2 years. They would produce hydroelectricity, not a bad thing. They would also change the way the water comes out of the dam, which would reduce the dissolved gases that now adversely affect the fish, because now you'd change how the water comes out. The city would get its 7,000 acre-feet of water. The irrigation district would preserve its rights for irrigation water. And these other companies that are tracking this legislation would know that there's some certainty here. And we do some things with the Warm Springs Tribe on some habitat conservation. None of this costs a single dime the federal government. None of it. And so I won't get deep into this story. Long and short of it is, I ended up with this copy of the Oregonian from 1977 from my neighbor when she moved. And I'm flipping through it at the campfire one night, the one night I was out camping. And here's a story about the Bureau of Rec holding 2 meetings, one in Portland and one in Prineville, on what to do about the water behind Bowman Dam. 1977. 77. This has been an issue Hatfield tried to fix. And so anyway, the community's been working on this for 3 years or more directly because of all these other things. And they keep getting steered off by some of the groups. And I finally said, enough. We're just going to legislate it. And that bill came out of committee last week. And you know, it grows, you'll see editorial in the Bend Bulletin today. It grows jobs. It does all these things. There's still unallocated water to talk about for future fish needs if you want it. And this is still a fight, because there are groups that always want to hang something else on, always want to stop progress. And you know, if we're going to get people back to work, we got to solve these problems, whether it's how we manage our forests or how we manage our water or what we do. And you can do it in a responsible way. Yes?
So, do you see a collective vision in Washington, D.C. Fix this problem without shallow, fix the housing issue?
No. I don't see a collective. It's not, it doesn't lend itself to a one solution. My concern is it lends itself to time, to just let the market work its way out. There have been these programs to help keep people in their homes, of which the federal government couldn't even get the money out the door quickly enough. And even when it has, then there's this really high recidivism or failure rate afterwards. So some of the people that couldn't afford the home the first time can't afford it the second time, and now the taxpayers are out even more. And I think ultimately you got to work your way out of it because we overbuilt. And we got people into homes they couldn't afford and still can't afford. Now, that's tough medicine. But I don't know what the alternatives are. You know, the banks have the ability to stretch out mortgages. And it would seem to me that would be a logical choice, keep somebody in their house. I met with the bankers last week on this topic, among others, and they said, yeah, the regulators aren't too, I thought maybe the regulators were precluding that, because I think the last thing a bank wants is to become a homeowner. And so they do try and work some of that. Maybe there's an opportunity to get them to do more of that. I don't know. They're not exactly as in the best capital position either because of all this. I'm open to suggestions, but I think it's time and market. Market's correct. It isn't pretty, but they do correct. Yes?
Is there a presidential candidate who you think best supports our interests?
Yeah. Yes. I do. Hey, look, I actually am going to be weighing in on that front later in the week, so I'll reserve for now. But I do. Yeah, I'll just kind of leave it at that. And one of my conditions of doing that is I want to play a key role in those issue sets, that and communications, since I chair the Communications Technology Subcommittee, and which has jurisdiction over everything from satellites to cell phones to televisions to the internet. And so I want to play an active role in that sort of policy to the extent one person can. But my first one was forestry issues. And the person I'm talking to is pretty well versed in those issues, and I think will be very supportive. Yes? Rick?
Will we be able to actually draw the whole congressional delegation together, including some that don't have the stripes?
That'd be every other one, by the way. I mean, I'm the only Republican, man. Yeah, I mean, the governor was back. I actually spent yesterday with him flying over to LeGrand and back for the demob. And the governor's actually playing a very effective role right now in asking each of us to put a staff person forward to work on the ONC piece, and we've all committed to do that. Yeah, so I'm hopeful. But I'm realistic, too, in that I do approach this probably a little more aggressively than others in the delegation. I mean, I don't think this is Earl Blumenauer's top priority to go the direction I'm going, all right? And if everybody has an equal vote in whatever this thing is, well, that's not exactly going to work for me. And so I sort of made an offhand comment that I thought, yeah, that'd be fair, 1 against 5. Yeah, okay, this works. We can do this. And I mean, but it is, you know, it's a rural issue, and so, but it's one, I would say, and to my colleague from the 4th District, DeFazio, he stepped out beyond where he ever has before on this issue, recognizing and admitting, as I did, that the paradigm doesn't work. Survey and manage doesn't work. The forest plan didn't work. There has to be a better way. Now, where we go from there is the issue. But I think it's you know, like one of these recovery programs, the first thing to do is admit you have a problem. And we have a problem. And I got a range of solutions, and I'm trying to keep my views open so that if we can come close, we can get there. You know, and that's why whether it's 1 trust or 2 trusts, I've been with industry leaders who make passionate arguments for both sides of that. And so the question is, when you set aside land for active management, not once you figure out where that is, it's what does that mean? What does that active management mean? What handcuffs are left in place and what freedoms are granted? And I mean, that's really what's at issue here. And I think when you see since 1990, I believe that the harvest on federal ground is down 80% in the country, and we lost 74% of the mills and, you know, 2/3 of our workforce. There's a lot of room to go the other direction, turn this around. And I just, you know, there is such a misunderstanding about terms. I think people hear the word wilderness and they think, oh, well, that's managed forest or that's national park or that's something I can, you know, and they think anything shy of that is complete obliteration and blacktopping and condos. And that's not the case, as you all know. And in fact, forests are not static. They are active. And with mortality and growth, we're losing the war daily. And then you get fire and abandonment. You know, somebody asked me the other day, well, how come after these fires they don't replant? And I said, because they don't have to. So now if they'd harvested, they'd have to. And they'd have to survive. So if you're going to abandon and then let it burn and then walk away, isn't that like the worst thing we can do if we want to regenerate a forest sooner? So we're trying. That appears to have exhausted you fully. The cheesecake is set in. Thank you very much for letting me join you again this year. Thank you for what you do out there. Thanks for hanging on and holding out and fighting. And know that I'm committed as I can possibly be to turning this thing around. And I think we've never had the opportunity we have right now. There really is an opportunity. So much is at stake, and nothing else has worked. Nothing else has worked. And so, for America's sake, let's get back to using our own resources. Let's get back to putting.
And those are the comments from Congressman Greg Walden from Sun River yesterday at the Forest Industry Council. We're here at the Shepherd's House in Bend today. We thank them very much for the use of the facility for this morning's broadcast. And great talking to Cash Lowe about what's going on here at the Shepherd's House. Tomorrow morning we're going to be in Redmond talking to Chris Esquivel. Chris was shot recently, and he credits God with saving his life. So join us for that story tomorrow morning here on EVM Media. I'm Dave Adams. You have a great day.